When I look in the mirror, I see an ordinary woman of 65. Nothing remarkable. Graying hair, wrinkles, hands scarred by years of working with papers and calculators. But my children look at me and see something else. A burden, a liability, an obsolete model of a mother who should be relegated to the junkyard. My name is Judith Bancroft. I live in Ontario, in the same house where I raised my children. I work part-time as a bookkeeper for a small construction company. A lot of my peers have already left their jobs, but I don't see the point of sitting at home all day. Numbers have always been my faithful friends. They don't lie, they don't manipulate, they don't pretend. Just pure math, where 2 times 2 is always 4, not 5, as my kids sometimes try to convince me. Tuesday morning, I'm making myself some tea. The phone rings with that insistence that only my son Colby has when he needs something. I pick it up and hear his voice, loud, confident, always a little impatient. Mom, I'm calling about your investment. I've found a great opportunity, but I need to act fast. I sigh, knowing what will follow. My son, an insurance agent with the ambitions of a financial guru, is once again trying to access my savings. Good morning, Colby. Good to hear from you too, I say, deliberately ignoring his introduction. He coughs, but doesn't correct himself. Look, this is a really good opportunity. Stock in a company that's developing a new technology, something in the medical field. Great growth potential. 38 years old and still can't come up with a convincing scenario. Something in the medical field is the best he can come up with? Colby, you know I'm a conservative investor. My money's in safe, fixed income securities. That's why you're losing opportunities. His voice is getting louder. You should diversify your portfolio, risk at least some of your capital. You have to. That phrase has been the leitmotif of our conversations for the past 5 years, ever since Hammond, my husband, died. I have to sell the house. I have to move closer to them. I have to give them power of attorney to manage my finances. I have to. I have to. I have to. Thank you for the advice, but I prefer to leave things as they are. I reply calmly. You just don't understand modern finance, Mom. He won't give up. Let me help you. I can come over tonight. We can discuss strategy. I've got a girlfriend's night out tonight. I lie. I really just want to read a new detective novel in silence. I hear him sigh in annoyance. Okay, some other time. But think about it, okay? We say goodbye, and I go back to my tea, which has gone cold. Now I have to reheat it. Colby is my oldest child. Ambitious, always sure he's right, never listens to others. When I was a kid, I thought those were signs of a future leader. Now I see it's just stubbornness and arrogance. His wife Pearl is a quiet woman who always agrees with her husband. They have 2 children, twins Arlo and Oren, who are 12 years old each. Good kids, but they rarely visit me. Colby thinks I'm a bad influence on them with my outdated views. In the evening, as I'm getting ready for bed, Brin, my daughter, calls. Unlike her brother, she starts the conversation with pleasantries, but this is only a prelude to the true purpose of the call. Mommy, you looked a little tired when I saw you on Sunday. Are you feeling okay? Are you taking your meds? Brin is 35 years old, an administrator at a dental clinic, married to Cleve, a physical education teacher at a local school. They have a daughter, Una, age 10. Brin has always been a caring child, but since her father's death, her caring has taken on an obsessive, controlling nature. I feel fine, Brin. I just didn't get enough sleep the night before. You have to take care of your health. At your age, that's it. At your age is another favorite phrase of my kids. At my age, you can't live alone. At my age, it's dangerous to drive. At my age, it's unwise to keep working. At my age, many people run marathons. I reply with a smile she can't see. Mom, don't start. Her voice becomes sterner. I'm just worried about you. Colby and I think you should consider a home health aide, someone to check on things, help with cleaning, cooking. I have a cleaning lady who comes once a week, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own meals, I replied, feeling my shoulders tense. But it's not the same as being there all the time. What if you fall? What if you forget to take your medicine? I don't take any medicine except vitamins, and she knows it. But in her mind, I'm already a frail old woman who can't take care of herself. Brin, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly fine. If anything changes, I'll let you know. But you won't admit it even if you feel bad, she insists. You've always been so stubborn. Dad always said, mentioning Hammond is a low blow. She knows I still miss him every day. It's been 5 years, but sometimes I still wake up and forget for a moment that he's not there. I'm tired, Brin. Let's talk about this another time. We end the conversation, and I put the phone away, feeling a familiar heaviness in my chest. My children, my flesh and blood, the ones I loved more than life, the ones I gave my best years to. And this is how they repaid me, with neglect masquerading as caring, trying to control me and my life. Hammond was different. My husband always respected my independence, my decisions. He was a quiet man, a librarian by trade, a lover of classical music and long walks. We lived together for 40 years, and he never once told me that I should do something. He suggested, asked, sometimes persuaded, but never demanded. Maybe that's why our children grew up the way they did. They saw his softness and mistook it for weakness, my independence for selfishness. Wednesday morning, I wake up to the sound of rain, gray drops drumming on the roof, as if reminding me of the inevitable approach of winter. I make myself some oatmeal, brew some coffee, and sit down at my desk with the papers I took home. The numbers calm me down, give me back a sense of control over my life. Around 11, the phone rings. This time it's Colby and Brin together. They're on speakerphone. These calls together never bode well. Mom, we've been thinking, Colby begins without preamble, that you might want to reconsider your will. I freeze, spoonful of oatmeal halfway to my mouth. I'm sorry? Don't be mad, Mommy. Brin intervenes in her sweet voice. We're just worried. Your will was made while Daddy was still alive, and a lot has changed since then. Yeah, Colby picks up on that. For instance, you live alone in a big house now. There are risks associated with that. If something were to happen to you, you inherit the house and my savings. I finish for him, just like it was in the will. Yes, but the process can be long and complicated, he continues. If you had set up a trust or joint accounts, we could have avoided the lengthy inheritance process. Now I understand. They want access to my assets while I'm still alive. Under the pretense of caring, they're trying to get their hands on everything I have. I'll think about it, I say calmly, though I'm seething inside. Great. Colby sounds overly enthusiastic. I know a lawyer who specializes in this kind of thing. I can set up a meeting. I said, I'll think about it, Colby. If I decide to make a change, I'll find a lawyer myself. There's a pause, and I can almost physically feel their irritation through the phone line. Mom, Brin's voice becomes strained. We're trying to help you. Why do you always make everything so complicated? I'm not complicating things. I just want to make my own decisions about my life and my money. But you don't know anything about modern financial instruments, Colby lashes out. You still keep your money in bank deposits like it's the 90s. I prefer low but stable income to high risk, I reply, and that's my right. The conversation continues for a few more minutes, but we go in circles. In the end, I promise to seriously consider their offer, knowing that I will never accept it. After the call, I sit still, staring out the window at the rain. When did my children become like this? When did caring turn into control and love turned into a desire to possess? Maybe they've always been this way. It's just that Hammond softened them, served as a buffer between us. Or maybe his death showed them that I was vulnerable, and they decided to take advantage of that. I think back to their childhood's Colby with his baseball card collection, Brin with her dolls and dreams of being a ballerina. I remember reading them bedtime stories, nursing their broken knees, being proud of their first successes in school. Where did that pure, unconditional love go? When did it transform into this condescending attitude, these constant attempts to control me? On Friday, I meet Ella, my longtime friend, at a small cafe near my home. Ella is the only person I can be completely honest with. "Did they try to get to your money again?" she asks, sipping her cappuccino. I nod. This time they decided my will was out of date. Ella shakes her head. She knows my situation. She has 3 kids herself, and while they're not as clingy as mine, she understands the dynamics between aging parents and adult children. "You know they won't stop," she says. "The more you resist, the more persistent they'll be. What do you suggest? Give in? Let them dispose of everything I've earned in my life? Of course not. But maybe you should be one step ahead. Change the will your way before they force you to do it their way." I'm thinking about what she said. She's right. I need to protect myself while I still have the opportunity to do so. "I'll think about it," I say, and this time I really mean it. That evening of the same day, Brin drops by my place unexpectedly. She rarely comes alone, without her husband and daughter, and I immediately tense up, expecting a catch. "I was just driving by and thought I'd stop by," she says, taking off her coat. "How are you, Mom?" "I'm fine, thanks," I reply, putting the kettle on. "How are Cleve and Una?" "Oh, they're doing great. Yuna's won the school science competition and Cleve's been promoted. We talk about the weather, the latest news, plans for the weekend, the usual small talk, but I sense there's something behind it. Brin never just shows up. "Mom," she finally says as we sit with tea in the living room, "Colby and I want to throw a little party for coworkers and friends." "That's great," I reply. "What restaurant are you planning on having it at?" She averts her gaze, and I can see where she's going with this. "Actually, we were thinking of having it here, at your house." I slowly set the cup down on the table. "Why?" "Well, you have such a spacious house, a big living room, a beautiful garden." She speaks quickly, avoiding meeting my eyes. "And it would be good for you, too. You'll meet new people, have some fun. You spend too much time alone. Of course, it's all for me to unwind, not because they need free party space and I'm a handy hostess to cook and clean." "Brin, I don't think that's a good idea," I begin. "But why?" She finally looks at me, disappointment in her eyes. "It's a great opportunity for all of us, and we'll organize everything ourselves. You won't have to do anything." I know that's a lie. After all, this is my house, and I'll be the hostess. They expect me to cook, serve, entertain their guests, and then clean up after them. "I appreciate the offer, but I'd rather decline," I say firmly. "Mom," her voice is rising, "you're always so selfish. We ask for so little, and you refuse us." Selfish. Another favorite accusation. I'm selfish because I don't want to give them my money. I'm selfish because I don't want to move into a nursing home. And now I'm selfish because I don't want my house to be used as a free party place. "Brin, it's my house, and I have the right to decide what goes on in it." "But it's our house too," she blurts out. "We grew up here. We have so many memories associated with it, and it will be ours someday. So why can't we use it now?" There it is. The truth has come out. They already think of the house as theirs, and me as a temporary resident who has stayed too long. I feel anger rising inside me, hot, fierce, almost unfamiliar. Hammond always said I was too lenient with children, that I let them sit on my neck. Maybe he was right. Brin, I say quietly but firmly, this house belongs to me. I paid for it, I pay the taxes. I decide what happens here, and I say no. She looks at me like I hit her. Then her face contorts with anger. You're going to regret this, she says, standing up. Colby and I were only trying to help you, and you're making this harder than it has to be. You always complicate everything. She leaves, slamming the door loudly. I remain seated, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and release. Maybe it's time to stop being so malleable. Maybe it's time to show my kids that I'm not a helpless old woman to be manipulated. I finish my tea, which has managed to get cold, and think about what I should do next. The day after Brin and I had our conflict, there was a lull in my life. The kids didn't call, and I enjoyed a rare peace. In the morning, I allowed myself a leisurely breakfast and then headed to work. The day passed in the usual routine: numbers, reports, quiet conversations with coworkers during my lunch break. By evening, I had almost forgotten about the conversation with my daughter yesterday. The doorbell rang when I had just finished dinner. Colby and Brin stood on the doorstep, both with unnaturally wide smiles. Colby had a bottle of wine in his hands, and Brin held a box of brownies. Surprise! They exclaimed almost in sync. I don't like surprises. In 65 years of life, I've learned that surprise visits rarely bring good news. Come in, I said, stepping aside. What brings you here at this hour? We decided we hadn't gotten together as a family in a while, Colby explained, walking into the living room. No reason to get together. We just wanted to spend the evening with our favorite mom. I hesitated, but got out wine glasses and plates of brownies. We set up in the living room, and for a while we just talked about nothing about Colby's job, about the grandkids' school successes, about a new recipe Brin had found on the internet. I waited for them to get to the point of the visit. Mom, Colby finally began, taking a sip of wine. Brin and I talked about yesterday. Here it is. I set my glass on the table and braced myself for another attack. You were right, Brin said suddenly. This is your house, and you have every right to decide what happens in it. I looked at her suspiciously. My daughter rarely admitted I was right, especially so quickly. But we still think the party is a great idea, Colby continued. Only now we want it to be your party, a chance for you to socialize with our friends, to expand your circle of acquaintances. Yes, Mommy. Brin picked up on that. You know how worried we are about you spending too much time alone. This is a chance for you to socialize, to make new acquaintances. I listened to them trying to figure out what the catch was. They were saying all the right things, but something in their tone, in their strained smiles, told me it wasn't the whole truth. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked cautiously. We'll organize a small party here, at your house, Colby explained. We'll invite our coworkers and friends, people you don't know yet. We'll provide food, drinks, music, whatever you need. You won't have to worry about anything at all. And when are you planning this party? Next Saturday, Brin answered quickly. We've already checked and most of our friends are free that day. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. You've already invited guests? Before you asked me? Brin and Colby exchanged quick glances. We were just scoping things out, Colby explained awkwardly. We wanted to make sure the date was right before we discussed it with you. Mom, please. Brin leaned toward me, her eyes pleading. It's going to be so great for all of us, and you won't have to do anything. We'll organize everything ourselves. I was silent, weighing my options. On the one hand, I didn't want my house to turn into a party place for my kids. On the other hand, if I turned them down again, they wouldn't let up. They'd call, come, pressure me until I gave in. Wouldn't it be easier to just agree now and get it over with? Okay, I finally said, but with a few conditions. Their faces brightened. Sure, Mom, Colby agreed quickly. Anything. First, no more than 20 guests. Second, the party ends at 11 p.m. Third, you're in charge of cleanup, both before and after. No problem, Brin nodded. Anything else? Yes, I want to know in advance who you've invited and have veto power. This demand clearly did not please them, but they agreed to it as well. We discussed a few more details, and soon they left, satisfied with their victory. I was left alone, with the feeling that I had just made a mistake. On Thursday, 2 days before the party, Brin arrived with boxes of jewelry and dishes. She stormed into the house like a hurricane without even taking off her coat. Mom, we brought some stuff for the party, she announced, walking straight into the living room. Oh, this furniture will need to be moved. I followed her, feeling the irritation growing inside me. What's wrong with the furniture arrangement? Well, we want to create more space for socializing, she explained, looking at my favorite couch with an appraising eye. This couch needs to be moved to the wall, the chairs in the corner, the coffee table out of the way. But this is my favorite table, I objected. Hammond made it with his own hands. Brin rolled her eyes. Mom, it's just for one night, and frankly, this table needs to be replaced. Outdated. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. It was Colby with more boxes. Great, you're here, he said to Brin, walking past me like I was invisible. Help me unload the car. There's a bunch more stuff. For the next 2 hours, I watched my kids transform my living room. They actually moved the couch against the wall, took out the coffee table, removed family photos from the shelves, and replaced them with some abstract figurines they brought with them. It'll give the space a modern feel, Brin explained, arranging the faceless figurines. Where did you put the pictures? I asked, not hiding my concern. Put them in a box and put them in your office, Colby answered. Don't worry, we'll put them back after the party. But I was worried. There were some of those photos that I treasured. Hammond and I's wedding, the kids' first steps, family vacations. They weren't just decorations, they were part of my story. I'd rather the pictures stay where they were, I said firmly. Brin and Colby exchanged glances. Mom, Brin began in her patient voice, we're trying to create a certain atmosphere. These old pictures don't fit the concept. What concept? I asked. I thought it was just a friendly party. Of course it's friendly, Colby agreed quickly. But we want it to look, classy. Isn't my house classy enough? That's not the point, Brin sighed. It's just that some things look old-fashioned. Old-fashioned, like me, I thought. I want the pictures back where they belong, I repeated. This is my house, and I want it to look like my house. My kids exchanged glances again, but finally Colby nodded. Okay, we'll get the pictures back. But the rest of the changes stay, okay? I agreed to the compromise, though I still wasn't happy with the way they were running my house. Saturday, the day of the party, my house turned into a war zone. Colby and Brin and their spouses arrived in the morning, and the final preparations began. They brought in more decorations, put candles everywhere, and hung garlands. They brought in extra chairs and tables and set up some kind of sound system. I tried to help, but every time I suggested something, they waved me away. Don't worry, Mom, we can handle it, Colby said when I offered to help set up the chairs. Rest up, we'll get it done, Brin echoed, taking the box of tissues I was trying to open from me. They moved around me, through me, past me, but never with me. I was invisible in my own house. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the catering team arrived, 3 young men in black t-shirts with some company's logo on them. They took over my kitchen and set up their equipment, pushing me to the very edge of the countertop. Excuse me, ma'am, we need more room, one of them said politely but firmly, and I retreated into the living room. There, Pearl, Colby's wife, was rehanging my curtains, replacing them with some light, translucent fabric. "It'll let in more light," she explained without looking at me. I watched in silence as my house transformed, becoming less and less like the place I'd lived in for the past 30 years. By 6 o'clock in the evening, there was nothing left in my house that reminded me of my life. The living room had become a trendy lounge with dimmed lights and strange music coming from speakers the kids had set up in the corners of the room. The kitchen became a makeshift bar stocked with bottles of expensive liquor. Even the hallway had changed beyond recognition. The walls were decorated with some abstract paintings that, according to Brin, created a mood. I stood in the middle of this alien space, dressed in the dress my daughter had chosen for me, with the makeup she had applied to my face, and I felt like an actress in a play whose script was unknown to me. The first guests began arriving at 6 sharp. They were Colby's co-workers, young men in stylish suits and women in elegant dresses. They greeted me politely, but their gazes slid past me, looking for someone more interesting. "Hello, Mrs. Bancroft," they said with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "What a lovely home you have." I tried to be a hospitable hostess, offering drinks, showing them where the restroom was, trying to make conversation, but no one was interested in talking to me. As soon as the polite formalities were observed, the guests immediately went back to their groups, leaving me alone. By 7 o'clock, the house was full of people. The music was louder, the laughter more rolling, the conversations more animated. I stood against the wall, watching the party that was happening in my house, but without me. Colby walked up to me holding a glass of champagne. "Mom, why aren't you socializing?" he asked with a slight reproach in his voice. "We threw this party for you." "I tried," I replied, "but no one seemed interested in talking to me." He rolled his eyes. "You're just not trying. There are so many interesting people here. Landon, for example." He pointed to a tall man with glasses. "He works in our marketing department, and he's into jazz. You like music, right?" Before I could answer, Colby was already dragging me across the room to Landon and his band. "Landon, this is my mom," he introduced me. "She likes music too." Landon smiled politely, but his eyes remained impassive. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Bancroft. What kind of music do you like?" "Classical mostly," I answered. "Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin." His smile became even more polite and even less sincere. "Oh, that's interesting. I'm more into modern jazz and fusion. Are you familiar with Corey Henry's work?" I shook my head, and he nodded, as if to confirm his assumptions about my lack of modernity. "Well, perhaps you should listen to him. It opens up new horizons." With those words, he turned back to his friends, effectively excluding me from the conversation. Colby had already disappeared, leaving me alone among strangers. I slowly backed away, feeling out of place in my own home. In the kitchen, I ran into Brin, who was chatting animatedly with a group of women. "Oh, Mom," she exclaimed when she saw me. "We were just talking about the latest interior trends. Chloe has an amazing sense of style. She helped me with the renovation last year." Chloe, a slender blonde with a perfect manicure, looked at my kitchen with an appraising eye. "You have a very, cozy home, Mrs. Bancroft," she said. "So traditional." The word traditional sounded like an insult to her. "Thank you," I said. "My husband and I picked everything out together." "Oh, that's so sweet," she smiled. "But, sometimes it pays to freshen things up. I could give you some tips if you'd like." "That would be wonderful," Brin exclaimed before I could answer. "Mom's been thinking about renovating for a long time, right, Mom?" I never thought about renovating. I liked my house just the way it was, with its worn floors that remembered my children's first steps. its walls with their growth marks on them, its kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals for my family. Actually, I'm quite happy with my house, I said, but thanks for the offer. Chloe and Brin exchanged glances, the kind of glances people give when they think someone is hopelessly retarded. I apologized and walked out of the kitchen, feeling my cheeks burning. In the hallway, I ran into Pearl, Colby's wife, who was obviously looking for something. Mrs. Bancroft, she addressed me formally, as she always did. Have you seen my purse? I think I left it here somewhere. No, I haven't, I answered, but I can help you look for it. No need, she waved her hand. I'll find it myself. At that moment, a particularly loud burst of laughter came from the living room. I flinched. That kind of laughter usually meant that someone was being ridiculed. I walked back into the living room and saw a group of guests clustered around my bookshelf, the same one where Colby, Brin, and I had put the family photos back where they belonged. They were looking at the old albums I kept there and commenting on the pictures with undisguised amusement. God, look at that hair, exclaimed one of the women, pointing to a picture of Colby as a teenager. That's a real mallet. And those glasses, echoed a man pointing to a picture of Brin. They take up half her face. My kids stood nearby, laughing with the rest of us. They weren't defending themselves or their memories. On the contrary, they seemed to enjoy this public mockery of our shared past. And who is this? Someone asked, pointing to a picture of me standing next to Hammond in front of our newly purchased house. Oh, those are my parents, Colby answered. A long time ago, back in the 80s. Did your mom always dress like that? Came the question, followed by a few laughs. I stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. My children were letting strangers mock our family, our memories, ourselves, and they weren't just allowing it, they were actively participating in it. At that moment, Brin noticed me and must have seen something in my expression because her smile disappeared immediately. She said something to Colby and they both headed toward me. Mom, Brin started, taking my hand and pulling me aside. Are you okay? No, I answered honestly. I'm not okay. Your friends are making fun of our family pictures, and you're helping them. They're not mocking, Colby countered quickly. It's just friendly banter. No one means any harm. Really? I couldn't hide my sarcasm. And when you let them make fun of my clothes, is that friendly teasing too? Brin and Colby exchanged glances. Mom, you're taking this too seriously, Brin said. It's just fun. Everyone realizes that it was a long time ago, and the fashions back then were different. It's not just fashion, I countered. This is our life, our history, and you're letting them make fun of it. Okay, we get it. Colby held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. We'll tell them to stop. Don't bother. I turned to leave. Brin grabbed my hand. Mom, wait. Don't ruin the party. This is your chance to make new friends. Friends? I looked at her in disbelief. Do you really think any of these people are interested in being friends with me? Of course they are, she exclaimed, but her eyes avoided my gaze. Just give them a chance to get to know you better. They already know me enough to make fun of my clothes and my house. I think that's enough. I released my hand from her grip and headed for the living room exit. But before I could take a few steps, Colby caught up with me and blocked my path. Mom, wait. His voice got lower, more intimate. Look, I know this isn't exactly the party you were expecting, but there are some very important people here. My boss, potential clients. I really don't want anything to ruin this night. This is it. The truth has finally come out. This party was never about me. It was for Colby and his career. What do you mean? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Just. He looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was eavesdropping. Just try not to do anything embarrassing. Don't tell your old stories. Don't show your photo albums. And please don't mention that you don't agree with our political views. I stared at him, not believing my ears. My own son had asked me not to be myself, so as not to embarrass him in front of his coworkers. Colby, I began, but he interrupted me. Mom, I know it's a lot to ask, but this is really important to me. For my career. You want me to be successful, right? Brin joined us, her face expressing the same insistence as her brother's. Mom, please, she pleaded. It's just for a few hours. Then everything will go back to normal. I looked at my children and saw strangers in front of me. When did they become like this? When did their careers and social status become more important than respect for their mothers? Okay, I finally said. If you don't want me here, I'll leave. No, that's not what we meant. Brin was quick to object. We want you here. Just be quiet and don't draw attention to yourself. Colby finished for her. I nodded silently and backed away. They seemed relieved and went back to their guests, leaving me alone in the hallway. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to comprehend what had happened. My children were ashamed of me. They didn't want me to be me. They wanted me to be invisible, silent, unobtrusive, a statue, not a living person. The music got louder, the laughter more raucous. Someone opened another bottle of champagne, and glasses clinked. The party was in full swing, and no one would notice my absence. I walked quietly down the hall toward my bedroom, hoping to find refuge from the chaos there. But halfway down, Pearl stopped me. Mrs. Bancroft, she looked worried. We have a little problem. Someone spilled wine on the sofa in the living room, and we need cleaning products. Can you show me where they are? I silently led her to the pantry, a small room off the kitchen where household supplies were kept. I turned on the light and started looking for the right product. Oh, look at this place, Pearl said, looking around the pantry. And clean. I try to keep the whole house clean, I said, reaching for the bottle of cleaner. Pearl took it but didn't leave right away. She stood there, shuffling from foot to foot, as if she wanted to say something. Mrs. Bancroft, she began at last, I wanted to apologize for all of this. I know this isn't the kind of party you'd want in your house. I looked at her in surprise. Pearl had always seemed cold and aloof to me, in complete agreement with her husband. This was the first display of independence I had ever seen on her part. Thank you, Pearl, I replied sincerely. I appreciate your honesty. She smiled awkwardly. You know, I'm not a big fan of such loud gatherings either. If it were up to me, I'd prefer a quiet evening with a book. You would? I couldn't hide my surprise. You never mentioned that. Well, Colby loves those things. Parties, networking, social events. He thinks it's important for his career. She shrugged. I'm just supporting him. In that moment, I saw in Pearl a reflection of myself, a woman who had subordinated her desires and preferences to someone else's, who had become a shadow next to a dominant personality. Pearl, I said quietly, don't let your life become someone else's script. Trust me, it will be harder to find your own voice later. She looked at me with a strange mixture of surprise and understanding. Maybe my words had touched something inside her, some string that had long remained untouched. Yeah, I'll go and do the couch, she finally said, picking up the bottle of cleaner. Thank you, Mrs. Bancroft. When she left, I was left standing in the pantry, surrounded by jars, bottles, and boxes, witnesses to my neat, orderly life. There was more authenticity in this small space than in the rest of the house, now filled with strangers and fake smiles. I sat down on a small stool that stood in the corner of the pantry and closed my eyes. The music, laughter, and conversations came to me muffled, as if from another world. I felt strangely detached from all the chaos, as if I were watching from the sidelines. How long I sat like that, I don't know. Maybe a few minutes, maybe more. Time lost meaning in this little sanctuary. The closet door suddenly opened, letting in bright lights and the loud sounds of a party. Colby and Brin stood on the threshold, their faces expressing a mixture of annoyance and worry. "Mom, there you are," Brin exclaimed. "We've been looking everywhere for you." "Why?" I asked calmly. "I thought you'd rather I stay out of the way." Colby rolled his eyes. "Mom, don't start. The guests are asking about you. You can't just disappear from your own party." "My party?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "Let's be honest for once. It's not my party. It's your party, in my house, with your friends making fun of my life." Brin and Colby exchanged glances. "Okay," Colby finally said. "You're right. This is our party, and that's why we're asking you to come back and be, hostess, for us. Or at least not sit here in the pantry," Brin added. "This looks weird." I looked at my kids and saw two selfish people who only thought of themselves and their reputations. They didn't care about my feelings or my comfort. They only cared about how it all looked to their friends and coworkers. "You know what?" I said, standing up. "I'm gonna stay here." "What?" Brin looked shocked. "I'll stay here in the closet," I repeated. "If you want a version of me that doesn't embarrass you by its existence, you can tell your guests that I'm not feeling well and I've laid down to rest, or that I've suddenly gone to a friend's house, or that I vanished into thin air. I don't care, but I won't pretend to be someone else for your comfort." Colby clenched his fists. "Mom, you're unbearable. We ask for such a small thing, and you make it so hard." "We thought we were doing you a favor," Brin added, her voice shaking with resentment. "We wanted you to have fun, to meet new people." "No," I shook my head. "You wanted to use my house for your party. You wanted to show your friends what caring kids you were, throwing a party for your old mommy. But as soon as I started acting differently than you expected, I became a nuisance." "That's not true," Brin objected, but her eyes avoided my gaze. "Of course it is." I sat down on the stool again. "And you know what? I'm really going to stay here in the pantry, because at least here I can at least be me and not the cardboard cutout you want to see in your mother's place." Colby looked like he was about to explode with anger. "Great," he blurted out. "Sit here and feel sorry for yourself if you want to. But don't you come out and ruin our party with your senile antics." "Colby?" Brin exclaimed, shocked by his bluntness. But he had already turned and walked out, slamming the pantry door loudly. Brin stood there hesitating, her face a conflict between loyalty to her brother and a vestige of respect for her mother. "Go," I told her. "Your guests are waiting." She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but changed her mind. With one last guilty look, she walked out, closing the door carefully behind her. So there I was, alone, sitting in the closet of my own house, while a party was going on a few meters away, thrown by my children for their friends. It would be funny if it wasn't so sad. I pulled my phone out of my dress pocket and looked at the time. 8 o'clock in the evening. The party, if Colby's plan was to be believed, was supposed to last until 11. 3 hours in the closet. Well, I've had worse, but the longer I sat there, listening to the muffled sounds of merriment, the more my anger grew. Not just resentment or disappointment, but real deep anger. Anger at my children for disrespecting me. Anger at myself for letting it happen. Anger at the entire situation that had brought me to this point, sitting locked in the closet of my own home like a naughty child being punished by his parents. No, it was wrong. It was humiliating, and I didn't have to put up with it. I scrolled through the contacts on my phone and stopped at the name Redmond Pierce. Redmond was an old friend of mine from high school. We'd lost touch for years, but we'd met by chance at the funeral of a mutual acquaintance 3 years ago and had been in touch occasionally ever since. He worked for the city's sanitary inspection service, holding some kind of managerial position there. I pressed the call button, and after a few beeps, I heard his voice. Judith? He sounded surprised. What an unexpected call. Is everything all right? Not really, Redmond, I answered, trying to keep my voice low so they wouldn't hear me at the door. I have a problem, and I need your help. After talking to Redmond, I stayed in the closet, listening to the sounds of the party. The music was even louder, the bass vibrating even through the walls of my shelter. The laughter, the voices, the clinking of glasses, it all blended into a cacophony that gave me a headache. I checked the time. It had only been 20 minutes since I'd called Redmond. He said he'd be there as soon as possible, but warned me that he needed to stop by the office first to pick up some paperwork. Everything has to be by the book, he insisted, and I was in agreement. No indulgences, no exceptions. Just strict adherence to the law. Sitting in the silence of the pantry, relative silence if you didn't count the rumble of music, I pondered how I'd gotten to this point in my life. When did my relationship with my children turn into this caricature of a family? Was I too soft on them as a child? Or was it that Hammond had always been a buffer between us, softening our conflicts with his calmness and judgment? My musings were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Cleve, Brin's husband, stood in the doorway with a bottle of wine in his hands. He looked a little surprised to see me. "Oh, Mrs. Bancroft," he said, stammering. "I didn't know you were here." "I'm hiding from the party," I answered bluntly. "What are you doing here?" He picked up the bottle. "Looking for a corkscrew. Pearl said she saw it around here somewhere." I pointed to the kitchen utensil drawer. "It should be there, second drawer on the left." Cleve opened said drawer and indeed found the corkscrew. But instead of leaving at once, he paused, shuffling from foot to foot as if he wanted to say something. "Mrs. Bancroft," he said at last, "I wanted to apologize for all of this. It wasn't my idea." "I know, Cleve," I said more gently. "You've always been more tactful than my own children." He smiled weakly. "They're not bad people. They just sometimes get forgotten." "That's no excuse for locking your own mother in a closet," I remarked. "They locked you in?" Cleve looked shocked. "No, I chose to stay here after they asked me to not embarrass them in front of the guests." Cleve blushed with embarrassment. "That's awful. I'm so sorry." He looked genuinely upset, and I felt a slight prick of conscience for what I was about to do. After all, Cleve had only witnessed the conflict, not initiated it. "Cleve," I said, lowering my voice, "maybe you should leave early, pick up Una, and go home." "What? Why?" He frowned. "Just trust me. It's better if you and Una don't stay for the rest of the party." He eyed me suspiciously, but before he could ask anything, the door opened again and Brin appeared on the doorstep. "Cleve," she exclaimed, "what are you doing here? Everyone's waiting for the wine." When she saw me, she pressed her lips together. "Oh, you're still here," she said coldly. "Where else would I be?" I replied. "You made it clear you didn't want me at the party." "We never talked," Brin began, but Cleve interrupted her. "Brin, maybe we should finish early and go home. Una must be tired." "What? No!" Brin was outraged. "The party's just starting. Una is having a great time with the other kids. I was just thinking—" "Not now, Cleve," said Brin. "Go and pour the wine. People are waiting." Cleve gave me an apologetic look and walked out, leaving Brin and me alone. "What did you say to him?" she asked as soon as the door closed behind him. "The truth," I answered, "that my own children are so ashamed of me that they'd rather see me locked in the pantry than among the guests." "Mom, you're being dramatic." Brin rolled her eyes. "No one locked you in here. You chose to sit here and sulk instead of trying to connect with our friends." "Connect?" I couldn't believe my ears. "The people who made fun of our family photos?" Who look at me like I'm a museum piece? You just didn't try, Brin insisted. If you'd made even the slightest effort to be friendly and open, I was friendly and open, I countered. But your friends aren't interested in hanging out with the old lady. They're here for you and Colby, for the drinks and the fun, not to meet your mother. Bryn opened her mouth to object, but at that moment the doorbell cut through the air, so loud that we both flinched. Who could it be? Bryn frowned. All the guests are already here. I have no idea, I lied, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Maybe the neighbors came to complain about the noise. Bryn gave me one last annoyed look and walked out of the closet. I waited a few seconds and followed her, trying to remain inconspicuous. There were voices coming from the hallway. I peered cautiously around the corner and saw Redmond standing in the doorway, accompanied by two young men in uniform shirts. All three were holding clipboards and looked extremely formal. Good evening, said Redmond to Bryn, who stood confusedly in front of him. I'm Redmond Pierce, Deputy Director of Sanitation for the City of Ontario. We have received a complaint about excessive noise levels and possible health code violations at this address. We're conducting a routine inspection. An inspection? Now? Bryn looked shocked. But we're just having a small family party. Nevertheless, we are obliged to respond to complaints. Redmond was unfazed. May I come in? At that moment, Colby came to the door, his face a mixture of annoyance and concern. What's the matter, Brin? He asked, and then noticed Redmond and his colleagues. Who are these people? Brin quickly explained the situation, and I noticed Colby's face go pale. Look, he began, adopting the businesslike tone he used when he wanted to impress. I'm sure we can work this out without formalities. If the neighbors complain about the noise, we'll just turn down the music. I'm afraid it's not just the noise, Redmond replied. We have reason to believe that there may be other regulations being violated here. We need to do a full inspection. But, Mr. Bancroft, Redmond interrupted him, you can either let us do our job now or we'll come back with the police. The choice is yours. Colby looked as if he wanted to object to something, but after a second's hesitation, he stepped aside, allowing the inspectors to enter. I quickly went back into the closet, not wanting the kids to see me, and immediately guessed my involvement in what was going on. Through the half-open door, I watched Redmond and his team methodically walk through my house, making notes in their clipboards. The first thing they did was measure the noise level with a special instrument that one of the young inspectors pulled out of his bag. 95 decibels, he announced. That's well above the allowable standard for a residential neighborhood in the evening. Colby quickly walked over to the sound system and turned down the volume, but the inspector shook his head. The violation has already been recorded, Mr. Bancroft. Lowering the volume now does not invalidate the fact of the violation. They then moved to the kitchen where the catering team was preparing and serving food. Do you have a permit to serve this many people? Redmond asked a confused young man in an apron. Yeah, I don't know, he stammered. They just told me to come and prepare food for the party. Do you have a health certificate? A liquor license? The boy looked helplessly back at Colby, who stood in the kitchen doorway, stone-faced. We don't sell alcohol, Colby tried to explain. This is a private party. We're just treating friends. And these people? Redmond pointed to the catering team. Are they friends of yours or are they employees? Well, we hired them, but... So it's a commercial endeavor, Redmond concluded. You need a special permit, especially if you're cooking for a lot of people. While Redmond talked to Colby, his colleagues continued their tour of the house. They looked into the living room, where the guests, sensing something wrong, began to talk anxiously. What's going on? Asked a tall man in an expensive suit, Colby's boss, it seemed. Sanitary inspection, one of the inspectors replied. Please do not leave the premises until we are finished. This request only increased the anxiety among the guests. Some began to quietly gather their belongings, clearly preparing for a quick retreat. The inspectors methodically checked every room, every corner of the house. At one point, I heard one of them call out from the far bedroom, "Sir, you'd better take a look at this." Redmond quickly headed that way, and I couldn't resist coming out of my hiding place to see what was going on. In the room that had once belonged to Colby and now served as a guest room, a group of men were found sitting around a card table. On the table were cards, chips, and money. Gambling? Redmond raised an eyebrow. In a private home? It's just a friendly poker game, one of the men tried to explain, hastily collecting the money. With real stakes, I see, Redmond remarked. I'm afraid that's a violation of the gambling law. Do you have a license to conduct such events? The men exchanged nervous glances, but said nothing. I thought so. Redmond nodded. Please stay where you are. We haven't finished our inspection yet. At that moment, another inspector appeared from the bathroom, holding a small plastic bag with a white powder in it. Sir, I found this on the shelf behind the mirror, he said, showing it to Redmond. I gasped in surprise. Drugs? In my house? This was too much. Redmond took the bag carefully and examined its contents. It looks like cocaine, he said seriously. We should call the police. These words caused a real panic among the guests. People rushed to the exit, forgetting their jackets, bags, and other things. No one wanted to get mixed up in a drug case. Stop! Colby yelled, trying to stop the guests from fleeing. It's not as bad as it looks. But no one listened to him. Within minutes, the house was empty. Just Colby, Brin, and their families, the inspectors, and me. This is a disaster, Colby moaned, collapsing onto the couch and covering his face with his hands. Just a disaster. Brin stood beside him, pale and confused. What's going to happen now? She asked quietly. There will be a violation report, Redmond replied in an official tone. There may be fines for excessive noise, illegal gambling, and cooking violations. As for drugs, that's a police matter. But those aren't our drugs, Colby exclaimed. We had no idea anyone had brought these into the house. Nevertheless, they were found here, said Redmond. And as organizers of the event, you are responsible for everything that happens in this house. Colby looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. His face paled even more, and his hands began to tremble. My boss was here, he mumbled. And the customers? They all saw it. My career is ruined. At that moment, Redmond looked in my direction and nodded faintly. I realized he was going to back off. We'd agreed on it over the phone to scare the kids, but not to bring it to any real legal consequences. However, Redmond continued, softening his tone, since this is the first offense, and given that the party is effectively over, we can limit ourselves to a warning, provided it doesn't happen again. Colby and Brin stared at him in disbelief. Really? Brin asked. No fines? No police? Not this time. Redmond nodded. Consider this an official warning. But if we get another complaint about this address, the consequences will be much more serious. He nodded to his colleagues, and they began to pack up. We're done for the day. Good night. When the inspectors left, there was an oppressive silence in the house. Colby, Brin, and their spouses stood in the middle of the trashed living room, surrounded by the remnants of the failed party. Unfinished glasses, abandoned appetizer plates, randomly left jackets and bags. What was that? Colby finally said, looking at me suspiciously. How did they find out about the party? Who complained? I held his gaze. Maybe the neighbors? The music was really loud. No, Colby shook his head. It was too coincidental. They showed up right when the party was in full swing. And this inspector, It was like he knew where to look. "What are you saying?" I asked, even though I knew what he was getting at. "You called them?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "You sat in your closet and called the health inspector to our party." I could have lied. I could have denied my involvement, pretended it was just a coincidence or bad luck. But I was tired of the lies, the pretenses, the games we played on each other. "Yes," I admitted calmly. "I called Redmond. He's an old friend of mine." Brin gasped in surprise, and Colby clenched his fists so white his knuckles turned white. "Did you?" he began, but the words seemed stuck in his throat with anger. "You ruined everything on purpose. You knew how important this party was to me, to my career, and you deliberately ruined it." "I didn't ask you to throw a party at my house," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I didn't ask you to invite people who gamble and do drugs here. And I certainly didn't ask you to lock me in the closet like I'm some inconvenient piece of furniture that needs to be hidden from guests." "Nobody locked you in," Brin screamed. "You chose to sit there and sulk like a petulant child. After you made it clear that I was in your way," I reminded her. "After Colby asked me not to embarrass him with my presence. I never said, 'Don't tell your old stories, don't show your photo albums, don't mention that you don't agree with our political views,'" I quoted him as saying. "You asked me not to be me, Colby. You wanted me to be invisible in my own home." Colby opened his mouth to object, but then closed it, unable to find the words to justify it. "You have no idea what you've done," he finally said bitterly. "My boss was here, the clients I've been trying to attract for months. They've all seen the shame. How am I going to face them now?" "It's not my problem," I replied, surprised at my own firmness. "You decided to use my house for your career game without asking my real consent. You brought in people who brought drugs and set up an underground casino. You treated me with disregard and disrespect. And now you're blaming me for the consequences of your own actions? You're always so selfish," Brin exclaimed. "Always thinking only of yourself. We were trying to do something nice for you, to get you out of your loneliness, to introduce you to new people." "No," I shook my head. "You were trying to use my house for your own purposes. You disguised it as caring for me, but really you were only thinking about yourself. And you know what? I'm tired of it. I'm tired of your disrespect, your fake concern, your constant manipulation." "You're gonna regret this," Colby hissed. "We were just trying to help you, and you ruined it. Just like you always do." "No, Colby." I looked him straight in the eye. "This time it was you who ruined everything. You and your sister, and you're gonna have to live with the consequences." I turned and headed for the stairs, intending to leave for my bedroom. Brin called out to me, "Mom, you can't just leave. We're not done yet." "I'm done," I replied without turning around. "The party's over, and would you be kind enough to clean up this mess before you go, like you promised?" I walked up the stairs, went into my room, and closed the door, cutting off their indignant voices. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange, almost forgotten sensation, a sense of my own power, of my own importance. I didn't let them trample on my boundaries, didn't let them disregard me. I fought back, and though the consequences were perhaps more dramatic than I had anticipated, I didn't regret my decision. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I heard the front door slam, once, then a second time. Colby and Brin were gone, leaving their spouses to clean up the aftermath of the party. Typical of them to avoid responsibility, to delegate the work to others. I sighed, feeling both relieved and heavy in my heart. I knew this conflict wouldn't end tonight. The kids wouldn't forgive me for ruining their party, ruining their plans, jeopardizing their social standing. They would be angry, blame me, maybe even try to get revenge in some way. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face their anger with my head held high. I was no longer going to be the convenient, malleable mother who could be manipulated. I was ready to stand up for my boundaries, my rights, my dignity. This was my life, my home, my rules, and it was time to remind not only my children of that, but also myself. The morning after the party greeted me with a deafening silence. No music, no laughter, no glasses clinking, just blessed peace. I went downstairs, fearing to see a mess, but to my surprise, the living room and kitchen were relatively clean. Apparently, Pearl and Cleve had indeed kept their promise and cleaned up after the party. Pouring myself a cup of coffee, I sat down at the kitchen table and looked out the window at my garden. The fall sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the last golden leaves on the maple tree that Hammond and I had planted when we first bought the house. It had been a long time since then. The kids were grown. Hammond was gone. Life had changed beyond recognition. But I was still here, still struggling. The phone rang, breaking my musings. I looked at the screen. Ella, my longtime friend. Of course, news travels fast in Ontario. Judith, she exclaimed as soon as I picked up the phone. I just heard about yesterday. Is it true that you called the health inspectorate to your children's party? Good morning, Ella, I replied calmly. And yes, it is true. There was a short pause, and then Ella burst out laughing. Oh my God, Judith, I can't believe you did that. It's, it's genius. I smiled involuntarily as I listened to her infectious laughter. You're not mad at me? You don't think I overreacted? Angry? Ella interjected. Darling, I give you a standing ovation. After what they did to you, they deserve a good lesson. Tell me everything. I want to know every detail. And I did, about how the kids transformed my house, how they pushed me aside, how they eventually asked me to not embarrass them and sit in the closet, about how their guests laughed at our family photos, about how I called Redmond, about his routine check, about the drugs and gambling found in my house, about how the guests scattered, and how Colby and Brin accused me of sabotage. Ella listened attentively, occasionally interrupting me with exclamations and comments, but generally letting me talk. When I finished, she took a deep breath. Judith, you did absolutely the right thing. Your children were out of line. They deserved that lesson. But they hate me now, I said, feeling a pang of regret. Colby said I'd ruined his career. Nonsense, Ella cut him off. If his career could be ruined by one bad party, it was already on shaky ground, and they don't hate you, they're just angry that you finally fought back. They're used to you always giving in, always accommodating their demands, and now they're going to have to get used to a new version of you, one that won't let themselves be used. A new version of me, I repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. I like it too, Ella agreed. Listen, why don't we meet for lunch today? I'll call Marge and Deirdre. We'll have a girls' night out. You deserve support after all this. I agreed, feeling deeply grateful for her friendship. As I hung up, I felt my phone vibrate again, this time an incoming message from Colby. We need to talk. We'll be there at 2. Not a question, not a request, an assertion. Typical of my son, who thinks the whole world should adjust to his schedule. I didn't answer. If they came, I'd be here, but I wasn't about to change my plans for their convenience. Instead, I dialed another number, Harlan Witt, the attorney who had helped Hammond and me draft the will years ago. Mr. Witt's office, a woman's voice answered. Hello, this is Judith Bancroft. I'd like to make an appointment to see Mr. Witt about changing his will. Of course, Mrs. Bancroft. There was a pause. Apparently the secretary was checking her calendar. Mr. Witt has a window today at 4 wow. Would that suit you? Perfect, I replied. Thank you. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. I'd been putting this decision off for a long time, not wanting to hurt the kids, but after yesterday it was clear that I needed to protect myself and my assets, not out of revenge, but out of common sense. Around 2 in the afternoon, just as I was about to head out for lunch with my girlfriends, the doorbell rang. Colby and Brin stood on the doorstep, both of them with frowning, determined expressions on their faces. "Hello?" I said, making no attempt to step aside. "What do I owe you?" "Mom, we need to talk," Colby began. "What happened yesterday?" "I was just on my way out," I interrupted him. "I'm meeting some friends." "This is more important than meeting some friends," Brin exclaimed. "You ruined our reputation, and we deserve an explanation." "I gave you an explanation yesterday," I replied calmly. "You disrespected my boundaries, treated me with disdain, and used my home without due respect for my wishes. I took action." "You took action?" Colby couldn't believe his ears. "You call that taking action? You've created a real disaster for us. My boss won't talk to me anymore. My clients canceled appointments. My coworkers whisper behind my back. And my reputation at the clinic." Brin picked up on that. "Everyone's saying they found drugs at my mother's party. Do you have any idea what that looks like?" I looked at my kids, flushed with anger, eyes widened with indignation, and felt strangely calm. "I understand that you're upset," I said, "but I can't take responsibility for the consequences of the party you organized. You're the one who invited those people into my house. It was you who created a situation in which I felt so disrespected that I was forced to take action." "We're not here to hear excuses," Colby said. "We're here to apologize. You need to apologize for what you did." I raised my eyebrows. "Apologize? Apologize for what exactly? For protecting my dignity? For not letting you treat me like I was worthless? For ruining our party?" exclaimed Brin. "For setting us up in front of our friends and coworkers?" "No," I shook my head. "I'm not apologizing for that. In fact, it's you who should apologize to me for disrespecting me, for manipulating me, for making me feel unwanted in my own home." Colby and Brin stared at me as if I'd just told them I was going to go to the moon. They clearly expected me to give in like I always did, that I'd beg for forgiveness, that I'd do whatever it took to win back their favor. "Are you, are you serious?" Bryn stammered. "Absolutely," I nodded. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm really late for a meeting." I walked out of the house, closed the door, and headed for my car, leaving them standing on the doorstep with their mouths hanging open in surprise. As I got behind the wheel, I saw in my rearview mirror them walking slowly to their cars, still shocked by my refusal to submit to their expectations. Rosie's Cafe had been my girlfriend's and my favorite meeting place for years. Cozy, with soft lighting and a pleasant atmosphere, it was the perfect place for long, intimate conversations. Ella, Marge, and Deirdre were already waiting for me at our usual table in the corner. "There she was, our heroine," Marge exclaimed as I approached the table. Tall, with short gray hair and a sharp tongue, she always said what she thought, never filtering her thoughts. "Sit down, tell me." "Ella said you've given your kids a real apocalypse." I sat down, feeling warmed by their smiles and genuine interest. "Don't exaggerate, Marge," I smiled back. "It was just an educational situation." "Educational?" Deirdre, the gentlest of us, giggled. "You called the health inspectorate to their party. That's not education, that's retribution in its purest form. And it was deserved," Ella added firmly. "After the way they treated you, they deserved a good lesson." "They just came to see me," I said, pouring myself some water from the carafe on the table. "Demanded an apology." "An apology?" Marge snorted. "From you? After they made you sit in the pantry like some kind of servant?" "Unbelievable." It's typical of grown children, Deirdre said thoughtfully. They still see us as the same mothers they had as children, always willing to give in, always putting their needs first. It's hard for them to accept that we are entitled to our own lives, our own decisions. My daughter still thinks she has the right to tell me what to wear and how to behave. Marge agreed. Last month she tried to help me with my closet by throwing out half my favorite things because they were old-fashioned. I gave her such a scandal that the neighbors thought World War III had begun. We all laughed, and that laughter was healing, cleansing. These women understood me like no one else. They each had their own stories of difficult relationships with adult children, of struggling to maintain their own identities in a world that expects older women to be submissive and invisible. I've decided to change my will, I said after we had ordered. I have an appointment with my lawyer at 4 o'clock today. Good decision, Ella nodded. After last night, they'll probably try to get control of your finances under the pretense of protecting you from your own impulsive decisions. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, I admitted. They've been hinting for a while now that I should put them in a power of attorney, let them help manage my assets. After yesterday, they might be even more persistent. Be careful, Deirdre warned. My sister faced a similar situation. Her son convinced her to sign some papers, supposedly to simplify her financial affairs. Turns out she gave him control of all her accounts. Now she has to ask him for money for her own needs. That's terrible. I shook my head. That's why I want to do this legally before they figure out some way to get me to sign something like this. You're making the right choice. Marge put her hand on mine. And we're with you, no matter what happens. Lunch with my friends gave me strength and confidence. We talked not only about my situation, but about a lot of other things books we'd recently read. News, plans for the future. We laughed, we argued, we exchanged opinions. It was a reminder that life doesn't end with relationships with children, that there is a whole world of connections, interests, and opportunities that remain open to us, no matter our age. When I arrived at Harlan Witt's office, it was exactly 4 o'clock. His secretary, a young woman with a kind smile, ushered me into the office where the attorney himself was already waiting for me. Harlan, a man about my age, with a neatly trimmed gray beard, stood up to greet me. Judith, he shook my hand warmly. It's good to see you, though I'm surprised to hear from you. What brings you to me after all these years? I explained the situation to him, not all the details of yesterday's incident, but enough for him to get the gist of the problem. I told him about the children's constant attempts to gain control of my finances, their manipulations, their disrespect for my decisions and my autonomy. Harlan listened attentively, sometimes taking notes, sometimes nodding and understanding. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands on his stomach. Judith, I've heard stories like this all too often, he said gravely. Unfortunately, many adult children see their aging parents as a source of financial gain, rather than as people with their own needs and rights. It's a good thing you decided to contact me now before the situation gets worse. What do you suggest? I asked. First, a new will. He began to curl his fingers. Second, a healthcare power of attorney given to someone you trust completely, but not your children. Third, perhaps the creation of a trust to protect your assets and ensure they are used according to your wishes, even if you are incapacitated. That sounds complicated. I felt a little dizzy from all the legal terminology. Don't worry, Harlan smiled. We'll take it step by step. Today let's focus on the most urgent thing, the new will. Tell me, how would you like your assets distributed? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I still want the bulk of the inheritance to go to my children, I finally said. No matter what, they're my family. But I also want some of the money to go to other people and organizations. the local library where Hammond worked, the animal shelter I help, and to my friends Ella, Marge, and Deirdre, who were closer to me than my own sisters. Harlan nodded, taking notes. And the house? He asked. It's probably your most valuable asset, I wondered. The house where my children had grown up, where Hammond and I had spent so many happy years, where every corner was soaked with memories. I don't know, I admitted. I need to think about it. Of course, Harlan nodded understandingly. You don't have to decide everything today. We can make a draft will with what you already know for sure and make changes later when you decide on the house. Thank you, I was relieved. One more thing. I want to make sure my children can't contest this will, claiming I was incapacitated or under someone else's influence. Harlan nodded. We can take precautions. Ask an independent doctor to certify your capacity. Invite disinterested witnesses to sign the documents. There are many ways to secure a will from being challenged. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the new will. Harlan asked questions about my assets, my wishes, and my relationships with various people in my life. He was thorough, not leaving out a single detail. When we finished, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't realize how much the thought of my children being able to gain control of everything I'd earned in my life and use it in ways I didn't want. We'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the week, Harlan said as he walked me to the door. Then you'll need to come back to sign in front of witnesses. Thank you, Harlan. I shook his hand sincerely. You don't know what a relief that makes me feel. He smiled. His eyes were warm and understanding behind his glasses. I can imagine, Judith, and I'm glad I can help. You deserve peace and confidence in your future. As I drove home, I felt strangely light, almost euphoric. For the first time in a long time, I was acting decisively, standing up for myself, not letting fear of offending my children or their disapproval stop me. I was taking action to protect myself, my future, my legacy. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed Brin's car in the driveway. My mood dropped a little. I wasn't ready for another confrontation, but then I reminded myself that this was my house, my life, and I had every right to decide how to treat them. Brin sat on the porch, wrapping her arms around her knees. She looked smaller, more vulnerable than she had that morning. When I got out of the car, she looked up, and I could see that her eyes were red from crying. "Mommy," she said quietly, "can we talk?" 3 months had passed since the ill-fated party. Winter had blanketed Ontario in snow, turning the town into a Christmas card. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the snowflakes swirl in the light of the street lamps, and thought about the changes to come. The decision to sell the house didn't come suddenly. After the conversation with Brin on the porch, after all her tears and apologies, which felt more like self-justification, after Colby's clumsy attempts to make amends with gifts and fake care, I realized I needed a fresh start. The house I had lived in for most of my life had witnessed too many conflicts. It held too many painful memories. I called the realtor the day after I signed the new will at Harlan's. Didn't tell the kids. Why would I? They would have only tried to talk me out of it, to manipulate me, to convince me I was making a rash decision. Instead, I moved quietly and methodically toward my goal. I met with a realtor, set a price, prepared the house for showings, reviewed offers, and now, 3 months later, all the paperwork has been signed. The house was sold to a young couple with 2 children, just the kind of family that would fill it with new life, new memories. I had to vacate it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to collect 65 years' worth of memories. It seemed an impossible task, but I was up for it. Ella and Marge offered their help, and I gratefully accepted it. With their encouragement, the sorting and packing process became almost an adventure as we found long-forgotten photographs, letters, mementos, and each find sparked a flood of stories and memories. Judith, are you sure you want to keep this? Ella asked, holding an old porcelain statue, a gift from Colby for my 40th birthday. A piece of it had broken off, but it could be restored. I looked at the statue, a shepherdess with a staff, touching in its old-fashioned innocence. It had once stood in the most prominent place in the parlor. But now? No, I shook my head. I don't want to take it with me. You can put it in the box for the thrift store. Ella nodded, not asking any more questions. She understood that I was freeing myself not only of things, but also of emotional attachments that no longer served me. My new home, a modest but elegant condominium apartment for people over 50, was waiting for me. Located near downtown, overlooking a park, it promised a new, simpler, but no less fulfilling life. There was a concierge, security, public spaces for meetings and events, and most importantly, no stairs, high thresholds, or other obstacles that could be a problem in old age. The kids only found out about the sale of the house when the deed was done. Colby called me, indignant and incredulous. "Mom, is this some kind of joke?" His voice shook with barely contained anger. "Mrs. Patel said she saw a for sale sign in front of our house." "It's not our house anymore, Colby," I replied calmly. "It was my house, and now I've sold it." "Without consulting us? Without any warning? How could you?" "The same way you could throw a party at my house without my actual consent," I remarked, surprised at my own calmness. "Just like you could have sent me to the closet to keep me out of the way." That's different," he objected, "and we've already apologized for that. We thought things had gotten better." "Did you?" I couldn't help the slight irony. "I thought you thought that if you were polite enough for a few weeks, things would go back to the way they were, where you could run my life, and I would obediently follow your instructions." "You're being unfair." His voice grew harsher. "We were worried about you. We wanted to make sure you were okay. And this is how you repay us selling the family home without even discussing it with us." "Colby," I took a deep breath, urging myself to be patient. "I don't have to discuss my decisions with you. I'm a capable adult. I own the house, and I have every right to use it as I see fit." "But this is our childhood home," he exclaimed. "It's our memories, our history. How could you just give it all up?" I heard real pain in his voice, and for a moment I felt a pang of regret. But then I remembered how he and his friends had made fun of our family photos, how easily they had pushed aside those very memories and history for the sake of one party. "The memories will stay with me wherever I go," I said softer. "But I can't live in a museum of the past. I need to move forward." "Where are you moving to?" he asked after a long pause, apparently realizing it was useless to argue. "To Maple Hills," I answered. "I bought an apartment there." "In that aging complex?" The disbelief in his voice changed to horror. "Mom, you're only 65. You're not old enough to live among people like that?" "People like that?" I couldn't help laughing. "You mean people my age? With similar interests, experiences, lifestyles?" "Yes, Colby, those are exactly the kind of people I want to live with." He mumbled something, but I couldn't hear. "I'm sorry?" I said we could help you find something better. He repeated louder. "Something more appropriate for your status." "My status?" I was surprised. "What's my status, Colby?" "Well, you're the mother of successful adult children, a grandmother, a respected member of society, not someone who should be living out their days in a nursing home." I sighed, realizing that he still didn't see me as a separate person, with my own wants and needs. To him, I will always be defined through my relationship with him, his mother, his support, his legacy. "Maple Hills is not a nursing home, Colby. It's a condominium for independent living. There are people there younger than me and much older, and I chose it because it suits my needs and wants, not your idea of how I should live." The conversation ended in a strained atmosphere. Colby was obviously disappointed and hurt, but I didn't feel guilty. I had done what was right for me, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. Brin reacted to the news more emotionally than her brother. She came to see me the day after talking to Colby, her eyes red with tears. "How could you, Mom?" She was almost screaming. "How could you sell the house without telling us a word?" "Brin," I tried to stay calm. "I understand that you're upset, but it's my decision and it's already made." "But why?" She gestured around the living room. "This house is perfect for you. There's plenty of space, a nice neighborhood. All the neighbors know you. Why leave here?" I could tell her the truth, that every corner of this house now reminded me of the humiliation I'd experienced the night of the party, that I no longer felt safe here, knowing how easily my own children could invade my space and remake it for themselves. But instead, I chose a more neutral response. "The house has gotten too big for one person," I said. "It requires too much energy and money to maintain. I want something more compact, more comfortable." "But we could help," Brin exclaimed. "Cleve could come over for repairs. I could help with the cleaning." "And then I'd be dependent on your help," I finished for her. "That's exactly what I want to avoid, Brin. I want to be on my own for as long as possible. My new apartment will allow me to do that." Brin opened her mouth to object, but then closed it, apparently realizing that no amount of argument would change my mind. Instead, she said what I suspected was the true cause of her frustration. "What will happen to the money from the sale? Will it go to buy a new apartment?" That was it. Always money, always the material side of things. "Part of it, yes," I answered honestly. "The rest I'm investing to secure my future life." "And we?" She hesitated, searching for words. "So you're not going to share?" "Share?" I raised my eyebrows. "You mean give you and Colby some of the money from the sale of the house?" She blushed, but nodded. "Well, we thought it's a family home after all, and we could use the money. Colby has a loan on the house. We have school for Una." "Brin," I interrupted her gently but firmly, "that money is from the sale of my property. I need it to support my life. I'm not going to give it away now, when I'm still perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But after—" She didn't finish her sentence, but her meaning was clear. "After I'm dead?" I finished it for her. "Yes, you and your brother will receive your inheritance, but not all of it. I've changed my will, Brin. Some of my money will go to charity, some to my friends." Her face stretched with surprise and, I must admit, resentment. "You changed your will? Without telling us?" "Yes," I nodded. "Just like I sold the house. Just like I bought a new apartment. Because those are my decisions, Brin. My money, my life, my choices." She left shortly after that, hurt and confused. I watched her get in her car and drive away, and felt a strange mixture of regret and release. Regret that our relationship had gotten to the point where we talked to each other like strangers, and the release of having to constantly conform to their expectations, to constantly give in to their desires. Moving day came faster than I expected. The movers packed the things I had decided to take with me, mostly personal items, books, some furniture that had special meaning to me. Everything else was either sold, given to charity, or thrown away. Ella and Marge were with me that day, helping with the final preparations, supporting me emotionally. The kids didn't come. I hadn't invited them, and they hadn't asked. Maybe they were still hurt, or maybe they just didn't know what to say or do. "There," Ella said as the last box was taken out of the house. "A new chapter of your life begins." I glanced around the empty living room, where we'd spent so many evenings with Hammond, where our children had taken their first steps, where most of my life had passed. Strangely, I felt no sadness or nostalgia, just a quiet confidence in the rightness of my decision. Yes, I smiled, and I'm ready for her. My new apartment was bright and spacious, with large windows overlooking the park, a modern kitchen, a convenient bathroom, a bedroom with a walk-in closet. Everything had been thought out for a comfortable life. The condominium's common areas included a library, a hobby room, a small gym, and a living room where residents could gather for socializing or activities. The first evening after moving in, I met some neighbors, a couple my age, Noah and Rachel Prescott, and a single woman in her 70s, Vivian Hollis. They invited me to a weekly wine night in the shared living room, and I gladly accepted. We have a gathering of wine lovers every Tuesday, explained Rachel, an affable woman with short gray hair and lively eyes. Nothing formal. We just bring a bottle of wine and an appetizer, chat, and sometimes play board games. Sounds wonderful, I smiled, feeling the tension of the last few weeks begin to release me. And we have painting lessons on Thursdays, Noah added with a wink. If you're interested. Painting? I was surprised. I'd never tried painting before. This is the perfect time to start, said Vivian, an elegant woman with neatly styled gray hair. I started at 73, and I'll tell you, it changed my life. There's something incredibly liberating about creating something with your own hands, even if it's not a masterpiece. I promised to think about it, but I already knew I would agree. The thought of trying something completely new, something that had never been associated with my previous life, was incredibly appealing. And indeed, within a week of moving in, I was standing in front of my easel in the common hobby room, unsure of my brush in my hand. Our teacher, an aristocratic-looking older man named Alastair, was patiently showing us how to mix paints, how to create basic shapes, how to render light and shadow. Don't strive for perfection, he said, watching my clumsy attempts at an apple. Strive to express your vision, your feelings. Art is not a reproduction of reality, it's an interpretation. I nodded, absorbing his words, trying to apply them to my uneven strokes. And gradually, lesson by lesson, I began to see progress. My lines became more confident, my colors more accurate, my compositions more interesting. But most importantly, I was enjoying the process. The hours flew by as I stood in front of my easel, fully immersed in creating my little masterpiece. You have a talent, Alistair said to me after one of my lessons, looking at my landscape, the view of the snowy park from the window of my new apartment. You have a sense of color and form. With practice, you can become a really good artist. I was embarrassed by his praise, but deep down, I was flattered. At the age of 65, I had discovered an ability in myself that I had never suspected. It was like finding a hidden treasure within myself. Wine nights on Tuesdays also became an important part of my new life. I got to know the other condominium residents, all of whom were interesting people with rich life experiences, with stories to listen to, with opinions that made you think. We discussed books and movies, politics and philosophy, shared memories and dreams. You know what the great thing about being our age is? Leonard, a former literature professor with whom we often talked about books, once told me. We're no longer afraid to be ourselves. We've lived enough to know what's important and what's not. We are free from society's expectations, from the need to conform, from the fear of judgment. We just are. I thought about these words often, especially when I was painting or reading a book in the quiet of my new apartment, or walking in the park with Vivian, who had become a close friend. I felt this freedom. Freedom to be myself, freedom to choose my own path, freedom to live for myself and not for others. The kids called a month after I moved in. First Colby, then Brin. Their tone changed. They became more respectful, more cautious. Perhaps my decisive action had made them reconsider their attitude toward me. Or, more likely, they realized they could no longer manipulate me to gain access to my money and decided to change tactics. Mom, we'd like to come visit you, see how you're settling in, Colby said over the phone. Maybe this weekend? I wondered. Part of me wanted to keep them at a distance, protecting my new peaceful world from their invasion. But the other part, the part that was still a mother, couldn't completely close the door on my children, no matter how difficult they were. Okay, I agreed. Come back on Saturday for lunch. But please, no children this time. I'd like to talk to just you. Sure, Mom. He sounded almost suspiciously docile. They arrived together on Saturday, both dressed smartly, with a bouquet of flowers and a box of expensive chocolates. I met them in the lobby of the condominium, then took them to my apartment. Their reaction to my new abode was a mixture of surprise and, I can't help but notice, disappointment. It's so small, Brin said, looking around the living room. Are you sure you're comfortable? I'm absolutely sure, I smiled. I like the compactness. Everything I need is close by, nothing too much. Where did you put all your stuff? Colby asked, noticing the absence of many items from the old house. Your collections, books, souvenirs? I only kept what was really important to me, I answered, pouring them tea. The rest I sold or gave away. At my age, it's time to get rid of unnecessary weight. At your age? Colby asked with a slight concern in his voice. Mom, you're only 65. You sound like you're going to die? I finished for him with a smile. No, I'm not. But I realize that life is finite, and I want to spend my remaining years the way I want to, not someone else. We sat at the table, eating the lunch I'd prepared, talking about the weather, about work, about Colby's kids and Brin's daughter. The conversation was polite but superficial. I sensed they wanted to say something more but didn't dare. Finally, after lunch, as we moved back into the living room with cups of coffee, Brin made up her mind. Mom, we wanted to apologize, she began, looking me in the eye. For the party, for the way we treated you. Everything. We were wrong. Yeah, Colby chimed in. We didn't respect your boundaries, your space. We were being, selfish. I stared at them, trying to figure out how sincere their apology was. Was it really a reevaluation of their behavior, or just a tactical move to repair the relationship and perhaps access to my finances? I appreciate your apology, I said after a pause. But I have to be honest with you. Our relationship has changed, and I'm not sure it will ever go back to the way it was. What do you mean? Brin looked worried. I mean that I will no longer be the mother who is always giving in, always putting your wishes before her own, always available at short notice. I will maintain a relationship with you, but on my terms, with respect for my boundaries, for my time, for my decisions. But we're a family, Colby objected. Families support each other, help each other. Yes, I agreed. But help and support shouldn't turn into control and manipulation. You've both tried to control my life, my decisions, my money, and I won't allow it anymore. They were silent, digesting my words. I saw a mixture of emotions on their faces: resentment, disappointment, maybe even some understanding. So you're, drifting away from us? Brin asked quietly. From your grandchildren? No. I shook my head. I'm just setting healthy boundaries. I'm still your mother, still your children's grandmother. But I am also Judith Bancroft, a woman with her own life, her own interests, her own future, and I intend to live my remaining years on my own terms. They left shortly afterward, promising to call the following week. I watched them get into their cars and felt a strange mixture of sadness and contentment. Sadness that our relationship would never be as close as I wanted it to be, and the satisfaction of finally being able to stand up for myself, to defend my right to self-determination. That evening, I sat by the window, painting the sunset over the park. My hands moved confidently, mixing orange and purple, creating a reflection on the canvas of the sky I saw in front of me. There was a glass of wine on a table nearby, and quiet music playing. Mozart, Hammond's favorite composer. I thought about my life, about the path that had brought me here, to this quiet apartment overlooking the park. The paint was smooth and steady,